Hey everyone, welcome to the Growth Chat by Mailmodo. This is Mansi from Mailmodo, and today we have a very special guest with us, Dan Oshinsky. Dan Oshinsky is the founder and creator of Inbox Collective and Not a Newsletter. You should definitely read not his Not a Newsletter. It's quite interesting. Today he's going to share his playbook for growing an email audience and what worked for him, what didn't work for him, and you can definitely take away a lot from this chat if you are trying to build an audience of your own. Welcome to the chat, Dan. How are you feeling?
Things are great. Thanks for having me. It's really excited to be here.
Yeah, we definitely it's a pleasure to have you with us today. Um, let's start, Dan. How did your journey start as a newsletter editor? So I know that you come from being an editor in BuzzFeed in the New Yorker. So how has it been? How did it all start? Can you let us know that?
So I got involved in newsletters a little more than a decade ago. My first newsletter was called Tools for Reporters. I was a reporter. I was playing with lots of different tools and thought I should have a place where I share some of these. And so I started a newsletter where I would share the things that I was using and what I liked and didn't, and built a little bit of an audience there, a few hundred subscribers. I was really amazed by the response that I got from email when I would post things on Facebook or LinkedIn or Twitter. Nothing would happen. I'd post a tweet and there'd be, one like, and I would send an email out to a few hundred people and I would get dozens of replies and people would ask questions or ask if I could get coffee or, hey, are you coming through the city at some point? We should chat. I was amazed at the response and people wanted to have a conversation with me because of my newsletter. And when I met the team at BuzzFeed towards the end of 2012, they said, we really like you, but we're not really sure what you would do here. Come back and pitch us on some sort of role. And I came back to email. Email felt like a really natural fit for BuzzFeed. We were a company that was really trying to tell stories that people wanted to share. Sharing was
Yeah,
built into the DNA of BuzzFeed.
BuzzFeed.
And
Yeah.
email is this, really natural source of sharing. You get a newsletter, you hit forward, you share with a friend, you get a link. If I want to share a link with a family member, a friend, a colleague, often it's, I'll shoot them an email. Hey, I think you might like this. Go check it out. And so we thought it'd be a really natural fit, and they brought me on to build the newsletter team there. So that's where it started at BuzzFeed, really accidentally, kind of stumbling into this sort of role as a newsletter person, building a team there, and then ultimately going on to do other things at the New Yorker and now Inbox Collective as a result of the fun that I had building a newsletter team first at BuzzFeed.
Wow. That's an awesome story. I mean, BuzzFeed must be really lucky to have you for sure. Um, Great. So let's talk about your document, not a newsletter.
Sure.
Uh, so yeah, it's always very fun to read it, and yeah, we'd love to know how it all started.
Not a newsletter was an interesting one. So and it really goes back to when I got started at BuzzFeed. When I was at BuzzFeed and I first got the job, we came up with a title. I was newsletter editor. It was at a point of BuzzFeed history where everyone pretty much made up their own title when they started. And if they were a writer, they were just called associate editor. We had literally at some point hundreds of associate editors. And eventually, when BuzzFeed hired an HR team, they said, we should really have actual titles. Everyone can't have the same job. I was unusual in that I had a different job. And so they said, just make up the title. What do you want to be called? Newsletter editor seemed fine. So that's what we went with. And then when I got the job, I went, oh, okay, well, I should really talk to other people who have this job, try to figure out how they did it, what I can learn from them, things that I should or shouldn't do so I don't make the same mistakes. So I started reaching out to other organizations that I liked in New York, around the world, who had newsletters. And I said, can I talk to the newsletter editor at your company? And the overwhelming response was, we don't have one. This is back in 2012 when most news organizations, pretty much if they had a daily newsletter, it was just an RSS feed of their latest stories. Here's the 10 most recent stories we published. You can sign up for national stories, sports stories, business, international, whatever you care about. But they didn't have actual editors curating those stories, writing content for newsletters, or in many cases, even have a dedicated person thinking about how they would grow or build their newsletter strategy. This was just at a different point for news organizations. Now, every news organization I talked to has one of these people. And in fact, what I saw at BuzzFeed was over time, when people would get these jobs, they'd see, oh, BuzzFeed, these other places are starting to invest in newsletters. Things are getting, pretty interesting. Maybe we should build a newsletter strategy. These other companies would hire a newsletter person, and then they would come to me and say, hey, Dan, what's working, what isn't, what should I do, what shouldn't I do? I became kind of a stop on the New York media tour when someone would get their job as newsletter editor. Oh, go talk to Dan. He'll kind of set you on the path. And I kept getting the same questions over the years, over and over and over again. How do I grow my audience? How do I convert readers to subscribers? What kind of newsletter should I launch? What kind of tests should I run? And there was a certain moment, I'd left BuzzFeed, I was at the New Yorker, where I realized that pretty much once a month, someone was coming to me asking me these questions, and I was answering the same things over and over again. I thought I should really have a place where I can go and answer some of these questions and start to share the things that I've learned. And I had previously, it was a couple years earlier, there was a talk here in New York that I gave about growing your email audience. I created a set of slides. They're actually still, if you go to Not a Newsletter, there's a link in there to 25 ways to grow your email list. It's a set of Google slides, and it started as a result of a talk that I gave. Gave the talk. They asked, can we make the slides public? I said, sure, that doesn't bother me. And one of the things that I've gotten on kind of the New York media tour, when people would come around, they'd say, how do you grow the list? And I said, I have these set of slides, take them, use them, learn from them, they're yours. And every time I would go to share those set of slides, I would look in it, and there were always, 2 or 3 people lurking in this Google Slides doc to try to figure out growth strategies. And I realized there's always people here, and I'm not sharing these in any public place. They're just kind of traveling around the news world. And I had some friends who had had success with Google Docs or Sheets, that sort of thing too. People shared those, and I thought, people like they like Google Docs and Google Sheets as kind of this format. It's an easy thing for people to share. People are sharing them obviously over email or Slack. I want to create a place where I can publish stuff. Maybe I'll just start a Google Doc. And so that was the origin, and it was January 2019. I came up with this pretty basic format of a handful of things to read every single month, a couple lessons. I'd share some personal stories, and thought, all right, I'll put this out as a Google Doc, and I'll share it out to the world. And I also, of course, being an email person, said I should probably have some way for people to remember to come back and read this again. It's going to be kind of hard for people to remember if I'm going to publish this, every couple of weeks, to remember to come back to this random address. I didn't even have, when I started it, there wasn't even a website for it. It was just the long, docs.google/a million different characters link. People are never going to remember this. So I started a tiny letter at the time and said, hey, if you want to be alerted when I publish the next one, sign up. I'll send you an email when the next month's issue is published. And I told my wife, if I get 10 people to sign up for this thing the first month, I'll do another one. 10, that was my thought. 10 would be enough people listening out there in the world that I would be worth my time to keep doing this. I wasn't sure if I was going to get 10. And I shared it with a couple newsletter Facebook groups that I was part of. I shared it on Twitter and LinkedIn with the existing network that I had. I emailed a couple friends in the industry and said, hey, I thought you might like this, check this out. And in the first 72 hours between those various groups and people sharing it with their friends who went, oh, this is great, I've been looking for something like this, 400 people signed up. I went, I was hoping for 10, 400 people in the first 72 hours. This is amazing. Yeah, okay, people want this. I'll do more of these. But what's interesting is when I started it, and to this day, this is still where my goals are, I didn't start it with the intention of growing it into a massive thing. It's still not a massive thing. I don't know if it'll ever be a massive audience. It's a pretty niche kind of thing. I produce a Google Doc where I share lots of links where if you work in email, And that could be working at an email company like Mailmoto, working at a news organization. If you're an individual writer with a newsletter, if you're a nonprofit with a newsletter, somehow you're doing something with newsletters, you might be interested in this, but there's only so many of us who really deeply care and want to stay up to date with the industry. It's never going to be huge. But my start was, well, it wasn't around growth. I mean, I wanted to get to 10 people. That tells you how ambitious I was. The real thing for me was I wanted to have some sort of impact. I wanted to be able to share things that I was learning. I also wanted to get to a point where the conversations I was having with other people who were getting these jobs were a little bit more advanced and a little bit more sophisticated. Instead of the same questions, should I launch a daily newsletter, or how do I grow my audience? Maybe I would get to a point if I could share some of these things on a regular basis. When people came to me to ask stuff, the questions would be a little bit more fun or different challenges that I hadn't heard before. So that's really where it came from. It was just me wanting to share things with an audience, me wanting to help this kind of community, and really just hoping that enough people would care that I could keep doing it.
Wow, that's awesome. I mean, you just thought of having 10 people in your list at that point, and you just got 400, and that's just amazing. And to be honest, the way you're being very candid about, you don't have a massive audience, and it's massive because you're in a niche. So I think even that is massive what you have currently. So yeah, a lot of people I think fail to understand. A lot of us fail to understand this, that we just run after numbers a lot of times, but I think when we are focusing on niche, we would want to have those quality people than having just a lot of numbers there. So yeah, I think that's really important to know. So I think let's just jump on to how you got those first 400 folks, and how did you start building it, and how did you start actually focusing on getting more people to join, especially focusing on having the kind of audience that you want for this, and not just anyone joining it.
Sure.
Yeah.
So this was so different for me than the work I'd done at BuzzFeed and the New Yorker, because those were companies where we grew the email audience into the millions of subscribers. And at with Not a Newsletter, my goals were so much smaller. My goal was, the first issue, 10 people would be enough, because I knew from Tools for Reporters, from that work, even getting 10 really engaged people, that was an audience. That was people who were listening, who were caring. I was making an impact for those 10 people. And it didn't matter to me whether or not it was 10 people or 1,000 people or 10,000 people. I just wanted to be able to reach my people, the people that I thought were going to listen and learn and hopefully do something with the things that I was sharing. I was essentially using this Google Doc as an investment in the community. So for me, and this is for anyone out there who's launching a newsletter, the first place you usually start is your networks and your community. So, if you have some sort of social media following, Twitter or LinkedIn, I found has been a really good source of growth over the years. I would announce those sorts of things. Hey, I'm launching this new product. Here's what it is, why I think it will help you. Check it out. I hope you'll sign up. That's a good place. If you're part of other existing networks too, like a big boost for me was there's a great Facebook community of some newsletter media people that a buddy in the industry named Ernie Smith, who writes the great newsletter Tedium, started. And there were a couple hundred people in that group. I was really active in that community. I often answered questions and would jump in and say, hey, I think you should check this out. Hey, check out this link. And so I went to that audience and said, hey, I hope it's all right. I'm going to be publishing this Google Doc. Hope you'll check it out. That was a big source of signups because those were my people. Those were newsletter. They had jobs in working in newsletters, usually at a newsroom. And so I got a lot of signups from there. And then the big thing after that was making sure that there were calls to action in all of the different newsletters, all of the different Google Docs, the top or the bottom, that said, hey, if you're new to this, want to be alerted when I publish the next one, click here, you can sign up, and sent them to a landing page. And from there, a lot of the growth in the next year was word of mouth. People would discover it, they'd pass it along to their friends. I had a buddy who worked at a big media organization here in New York who said, who confessed that at the middle of the month when I would publish the Google Doc, they'd be at the office. This was 2019. People were still really at offices at this point here in New York in a slightly different way. And someone would jump, when it came out, someone would jump into the Slack room that the audience development team had built and they would just say, "It's here," and then just drop the link. And it was like, oh, that's good. That's what I'm going for. It was when I was launching, every time I'd launch a new issue, for some folks, it was a little bit of an event. All this stuff is going to be here. Dan has curated all these links, maybe a few new ideas we're going to be able to learn from. Like, yeah, that's what I was going for. And so word of mouth was really, really crucial. Now, over time, other things started to, come on board and help. I started to utilize things like I mentioned earlier. I have that list of 25 ways to grow your email list. That's been a really good lead magnet for me. Not a traditional sort of lead magnet where you maybe go to a website, enter your contact information, click a button, and then say, hey, download this lead magnet and I'll add you to my email list. There, I just have a couple slides at the start and finish that say, hey, if you're getting this, briefly to introduce myself, I'm Dan. I put this together. I write this thing every single month. Check it out. You can sign up here. And that has been a really good source of signups over the years. I built traditional sorts of lead magnets where I would give a talk or do a webinar at the end, something like this. At the end, the host would often say, hey, Dan, is there anything else you want to shout out or mention? I'd say, hey, I'm going to drop something in the chat. I built this checklist that you can sign up for. You go to a Google form, enter your information, check the box if you want to sign up for the newsletter. Or I'd promote some sort of new project or thing that I was working on. So webinars, podcast interviews became a good source of signups for me. But over the years, really up until the last couple of months, the biggest source of signups were social media, groups that I was part of that I would post in or share links to, and word of mouth. Those were the really three big ones. I got very lucky in that, when someone would get a job in this space, they would often ask their friends, is there anything I should read? Is there anything I should check out? And if their friend was plugged into the email space, they might go, oh, there's this guy and he writes this really long Google Doc about email and it's kind of weird, but you should check it out. I'm putting words in their mouth, obviously, but that was the idea. It was a little bit different. It was a little bit strange. I think the fact that it was part of the reason I called it not a newsletter is it's not a newsletter. It is a Google Doc. The weirdness of it made it a little bit intriguing. I will say now that, and this is really important, I would not recommend to anyone that they build a long-term publishing strategy around Google Docs. They're not searchable. They're really tough to share. It is kind of hard to grow them because, again, you can't just type in, not a newsletter, Google Doc. You can't. I ended up building out initially like links on my personal website, danoshinsky.com, introducing not a newsletter. So you could find it. I built a page using the tool Card, C-A-R-D, to create a landing page that was searchable so people could find some version of it, but it was really hard to find. Google Docs you also get no data. For the longest time, to this day, I don't know how many people read the Google Doc every month. I know how many people are on my email list, but I have no idea how many people read it. I just see how many anonymous alligators and caterpillars and stuff are in the corner. And so it's not a great publishing platform, but it was a good place for me to start. And then over time, it kind of became, I have this in my bio. I'm very much an accidental Google Doc publisher. I never thought that this would be the thing that I always wrote this thing in. At some point, I figured I would move it over to a real website or a newsletter, but it's become known in the industry as this Google Doc that people read. People seem to like it. The feedback that I get from readers, via email or when I meet people in person is, I love the Google Doc. It's one of my favorite things to share and read. And so there's something that's kind of special and weird and unique about it. So I never expected, I just launched it on Google Docs because it was a good way to start. It was easy. It was free. It let me prove out the concept. I got the response that I wanted. But now I became known as the guy with the Google Docs. So it will probably always be, as long as I publish it, it will probably always stay a Google Doc because, well, I think if I turned into a website, people would go, "Oh, he sold out. It's just a website now. Ah, it's no fun."
Yeah, I mean, it gives you the edge, and I think that's what makes you different from others and what others are doing. So I think, yeah, if you make it into a website or just send it over an email, it'll be just like any other newsletter. So it won't
Sure,
be not a newsletter.
everyone needs something that's a little bit different that helps them stand out and go,
Yeah,
hi, this is what makes me me. For
yeah,
me, at least in the digital world, the Google Doc is that, but everyone has, it could be through the voice or tone that you use. It could
yeah,
be through the types of content you could produce. It could be through the format or design of your newsletter or website. There might be something that helps you stand out a little bit and go, oh, this is what makes this a little different, a little bit special. And
exactly.
everyone needs to find that,
Yeah.
I think, to help stand out on the web.
Yeah, I think I totally agree with it. I think even the first time that I came across not a newsletter, it immediately caught my attention because it was a newsletter yet not a newsletter. I mean, so yeah, it definitely stands out, I think. So you don't have any plans to sort of move it to an email completely, or probably a website? Do you have any plans in the future to do it?
So this is where I give the this is the caveat. This is kind of the mini pivot. So the Google Doc itself, which is, for those who aren't familiar with it, it is literally a Google Doc. It's a couple thousand words every month. I share the things that I'm reading in the industry. I share some stories and lessons. I share jobs from the industry that people are publishing and some resources you can check out. And I'm going to keep that as that. However, as I have gone through the years, I've realized, there's still more that I want to share. There's original stories in particular that I want to share. How to, tackle a particular task, how to, whether it's around growth tactics, audience development tactics, engagement, deliverability, design. There's just more to share, and there's only so much I can squeeze into the Google Doc every single month. It's already way too long. And so just about a month ago, I finally caved, and Inbox Collective, which for 3 years, the Inbox Collective website for my business had just been a set of Google Slides. Well, if I had a Google Doc as my publishing platform, it made sense to have Google Slides as the website. And that's where I said, hi, I'm Dan. I do this consulting work. If you want to work with me, get in touch. Here's how to email me. And I finally caved, and that became a real website. And as part of that, I'm working with an editor and some writers now. I'm writing some stuff myself, and we're writing a little bit extra on inboxcollective.com as well, trying to publish about one story a week with recommendations and case studies and interviews, because I just think there's more to share. But I'm trying to keep the spirit of the Google Docs alive. Like, one thing we're doing is, in the little section breaks between sections of stories, instead of, like, at the New Yorker, there would be different these we call them spots. There were this, if you ever open a copy of the New Yorker, there are these little artistic kind of little graphics that are kind of random. They're not connected to the stories. They're just designed to be fun visual things that stand out. They're usually themed without an issue. But how could we do something like that? And so we're actually incorporating some of the Google Docs animals into some of the stories too. So there's a little bit of the spirit of the Google Docs still alive, even in the stories we publish on the website too.
That's quite interesting. I think, yeah, it'll be great to keep that alive. And I think within Books Collective, you can of course go into a different segment altogether. That's amazing. Great. So I'll just take a pause and let the viewers here know that you can just put up your questions, and we'll take it up as we go. Anything that you have for Dan to ask, just feel free to put it up here. Um, yeah, so you just mentioned that one of the biggest sources, yeah, one of the major sources that you think that you got your sign-ups from was social media. Could you probably elaborate on how can us as Mail Modo or anyone trying to build an email audience can leverage social media and even lead magnets to sort of get more and more registrations and email audience?
Well, the biggest thing, if you're doing any sort of promotion on social media or really creating any sort of content, whatever you produce has to be super useful for your audience. And a lot of what the success that I've had over the years has come back to understanding, what does my audience care about? What do they need? What do they want more of from me? So I've learned a lot about my audience over the years. One big way for me is actually through my welcome series. When somebody signs up for the Not a Newsletter email list, I send you an email right away and say, hey, Dan, 2 questions for you. Do you have a newsletter, and what is it? And what are you struggling with when it comes to newsletters? Hit reply, I want to hear from you. And there's 2 reasons for this. One is, I just know from working and talking with deliverability experts in this space, if I can get people to engage with my newsletters right away, that makes sure that I stay out of the spam folder and the good parts of the inbox. But more importantly for me, it's an opportunity to learn. As soon as somebody signs up, someone can hit reply and they can say, hey, Dan, I'm struggling with growth. Hey, Dan, I need help picking the right email service provider. Hey, Dan, I'm thinking about how we can launch another newsletter, but I'm not sure what stats I should be looking at or metrics we should care about. And that is really useful because I get real-time feedback from the audience about what they need, what they want more of. And about 1 in 5 readers, it's a stat that I've tracked over the years, about 1 in 5 readers writes back to me. I've tried a lot of things. Now, just recently, I updated the message after somebody signs up to say, hey, I have these 2 questions. I genuinely want to know them. Like, I actually reply to all the emails people send. Please check them and reply. I think a lot of people, especially in the line of work that we are in, are used to seeing lots of deliverability hacks and tricks, and so they think it's just me trying to get a reply to tell the Gmail algorithm, Dan, my emails are good. It's like, no, I actually genuinely want to know this. This is not me trying to hack the system. I'm using this to learn. I like starting conversations with readers. Often it happens all the time where a reader will write back and I'll share a link and they'll ask a question. The welcome email will turn into a days or weeks long email thread with this person asking questions, going back and forth. I don't mind. I'm happy to share stuff. Again, a lot of what I do comes out of how can I help this community? How can I be useful? And so whatever you're doing on social media or other channels, understanding what people need from you is crucial. I use the welcome series. I use a survey that I do in my newsletter to try to understand, okay, this is what people say they want more of. This is the feedback that I'm getting. These are the questions that I'm being asked. Let's try to go out and produce stuff to answer those questions, to serve those reader needs, to help this community. So no matter what you're doing, 1, the content has to be really good. 2, it has to match up with what your audience wants. And some of this comes back to when I'm doing a pitch on social media, creating a new checklist or lead magnet, launching a new article, trying to make sure that I'm positioning the content in a way that it explains what the problem is and how this thing that I made is going to help solve that problem or make somebody smarter or teach something new that they might want to learn. I found that if you're just going about it saying, there are times where you can say, hey, I'm launching this new thing. It's great. It's exciting. I hope you'll check it out. But if every day I just go on social media and go, I have a newsletter, please sign up for it, at some point people will tune that out. So it's about thinking, okay, well, what am I bringing to the table that's going to be useful? And how do I make sure I explain to this audience, I made this thing, here's why I think you'll like it. Or I have this thing, there's this problem out there, I'm trying to solve it, check this out. And so much of this comes back to audience listening, understanding the audience's needs, and then trying to match the content and the way I talk about it on social media to line up and show the audience, this is why this is worth their time. This is why I think you should spend a few minutes with this thing. It's going to solve a need. It's going to fix a problem. It's going to teach you something new. Here it is. If it's always just, there's a new post, check it out, and I do some of that, to be honest. In particular, Twitter is the one place where I get kind of lazy, just because there's only so many characters, and I don't want to do long threads, and so I'll just often say, how do I do the pitch in 240 characters? Okay, I'll try to condense it down, but sometimes I get lazy and just go like, I got a new thing to read. Here it is, because I've discovered with Twitter, it's the one place where I just spend a lot less time. But LinkedIn in particular, I will spend a lot more time investing in that and thinking about how do I pitch this? How do I explain the problem? And that has been really, really crucial. Making sure it's always, whatever I'm posting on social media is always positioned around, this is how I can help. This is how this thing is going to serve you.
Interesting. So what we take away from this is that one is, of course, consistency is really important. That you're, going out there regularly and showing up and letting them know that, hey, this is the newsletter, just sign up. Obviously, sort of involving them as well,
Yeah.
where we're asking them, what do you need? What is that would help you? And I think that's very important as well, that you listen to what they want, and then you give exactly what they want, and then that is what sort of motivates the readers to be engaged with it and not just subscribe and just be with it, right? I mean, it's very important to obviously engage them as well, once they've subscribed. So yeah, I think great points there. Since you already touched upon that, the content part, and it's really important to sort of knock and see that what is it that they're looking for. Probably we can just touch up on it more as how, and what kind of content works best, and what has been your learning there, when it comes to the content for a newsletter.
So content really does tie back to that audience research and listing and trying to figure out, especially as my audience has evolved. When I first started, I had one type of person in mind. My audience was people who had pretty much my exact job. You worked at a news organization and you worked in newsletters or audience development. That was all I was writing for. That person who worked at the New York Times or The Economist or CNN, any sort of business, a local newsroom, that person was my audience. And then more people started signing up. People who worked in email technology, people who worked at nonprofits, recently a lot of independent writers in the creator space. So as more people sign up in those spaces, I try to adjust. I add more sections to the newsletter, or I'm thinking about stories now for Inbox Collective that are targeted to specific types of audiences, because there are now a few different audiences under this larger kind of not a newsletter umbrella. I found that for my audience in particular, the stuff that they tend to like most, they really like how-tos. They're like, Dan, I'm thinking about doing a survey. I know surveys are important. Can you explain how to set up a survey? What are the questions that I should be asking? What kind of tools should I use? Okay, we can build stuff around that. All right, Dan, I saw that this story about setting up a referral program seems interesting. I read something that this is something that Morning Brew does. Is this for me? What tools should I use? What does it look like? Okay, we build stuff to help answer those sorts of questions. Those sorts of things are great. And then the other thing that's been really big for me, and this has been fun over the last year or so, there's a great person in the email space, a deliverability expert, Yana Tori Esperaki, and she's fabulous. And Yana Tori, actually, I discovered her. We had a mutual friend, and she was on their podcast, and they said, I was talking with her, and she just kept bringing your name up. I think you should chat. And so we had a conversation. And she was a fan of the Google Doc. And then the more we chatted, I just went, she knows so much about deliverability. Would you be interested in writing something for the Google Doc? I always got deliverability questions. And while I know a lot about this, there are people who know more than me. She is certainly one. And so we put it out there to the audience. Hey, Yana Tori's going to write an occasional column called Ask a Deliverability Expert. And the audience was like, yes, This is the stuff we've been looking for, because they would ask questions. I mean, I get a lot of these in my inbox. People would ask questions like, I heard that too many links in my email is going to make my email go to spam. How many links is too many? Is it 6? Is it 9? Is it 14? And it's like, oh no, like that is kind of an email myth that, too many links people have, but people don't know. Or I heard that if I put a spammy word, I Googled the list of spammy words that go into, that might make my email go to spam. Well, if you look up the spammy words list on the web, you'll find words like offer, sale, having a dollar sign in your email. If it was true that just having a dollar sign in your email would make your email go to spam, the entire e-commerce business on the web, or a pound sign or euro, whatever it is, the entire e-commerce business on the web would cease to exist. People couldn't send out an email that says, I have a special sale, buy my shoes, buy my product. So what's been fun is Yana Tori is an expert that I can bring in and go, all right, these are the questions I'm getting from my audience. A lot of them come from my welcome email. People write back, hey, I had a question about this. Awesome. Send it to her and go, we got another one. You think you can write a column about this? And then she'll write a column. I saw this the other day. This made me so happy. Somebody on Twitter asked, they said, I'm worried that this subject line is going to make my email go to spam. And then another writer saw it and chimed in and went, actually, Yana Tori answered this in a recent Ask a Deliverability Expert column. Here's the link to the story. And they shared it. And the person was like, oh my God, thank you so much. And then we followed up afterwards. The person sent out the email with the subject line they were worried was going to go to spam. It didn't. The subject line did very well. The newsletter did well. It's like, yes, this is the good stuff. This is coming back to, I just want to create stuff that the audience likes and reads and shares and finds useful. There's a reason that I haven't turned this into some sort of paid product. I like that it's open. I like that there's a resource that people can find and discover and share. Plus, for me, what I do, the core of my business is consulting work that I do with newsrooms and nonprofits and some individual writers. And the Google Doc and the other writing that I do is the best possible advertisement for my work, because the more people read me, the more they get to know me, get to know how I think, get to know the questions that I like to answer, or things that I'm thinking about. So often when I start a conversation with a new client, it's not, tell us about how you would answer this, or, what do you think about that? But we kind of just jump to it. Hey, I read that you were talking about this, this, and this in recent issues. We're also thinking about these challenges. We'd love to work with you to help solve them. Well, awesome. Let's jump in. And we already have kind of a common language. We already have a mutual understanding of, okay, these things are important. You've read about them through my Google Doc. You understand they're important. I don't have to convince you that it's important. Now let's just get to work. So much of this it's an unusual strategy, but I hope if there's anything people take away from the Google Doc experience, start small, start with simple tools that let you prove out the concept. And then over time, you can always make things more complicated. You can always add things. You can always use audience research to understand how to make it better. But being able to start small, start simple, prove the concept, prove that there's an audience that wants this, and then grow from there, that's really useful. Because, I said at the beginning, but my goal was 10 people to sign up for the first newsletter. If I'd gotten no response, if 2 people had signed up, I might not have done another one of these. So I would have said, I would have tried my hardest to share it around with friends, but if I'd sent around to friends, posted in these groups on social media, and the response had been nothing, I got 2 people, I might have said, all right, well, I actually kind of thought there was going to be a bigger audience for this, but I shared it personally with dozens of friends and posted in all these groups and on social media. Nothing happened. People just weren't that interested. The feedback was crickets. I said, okay, well, I thought this was going to be great, but I guess it wasn't. I'll try something else. I'll try a different approach. I got lucky that it worked. That was one of those lessons from BuzzFeed that, we tried lots of things. most of the things we tried didn't work at all. The stuff that did work, we did more of. I've always tried to maintain that sort of approach going forward. If it works, you invest more in it. If it doesn't, right, try a different approach or move on to the next thing. You're never going to have any shortage of ideas. People, especially who work in the digital space or email space, they always have ideas. There's always something else they could do. So you try it, you see what happens, then you make a plan from there.
Yeah, interesting. I mean, yeah, so it's always about, that A/B testing one. Always like trial and error and see what works. And of course, I mean that gives you the best results, I guess.
Sure.
That's your, yeah. That's kind of should be the playbook for everyone. That just
Yeah.
try and see if it works. It works. It doesn't. It doesn't. Yeah. That's kind of should be the playbook for everyone. That just awesome. Moving on, I think we can just take up the question that has just come up here before we go on to other questions.
Nice.
Zishan here asked, how do you drive the traffic on your not a newsletter since it's a Google Doc? Also, how do you balance for the fact that you cannot have a form to collect subscription from the Google Doc?
Great questions. So one is I, with not a newsletter, I decided there were other ways that I could measure success because I couldn't see how many people clicked on links. I couldn't see how much traffic that I got. One was growing my email audience. That was really useful. If I saw the email audience, and I did, continue to grow, even though the growing was slow, every month I'd add maybe 100 or 200 new subscribers, that was good. As long as the email list was continuing to grow, that was a sign of success. People liked it enough to say, here's my email address. I want more of this. Replies to the welcome series, that was a really crucial metric point for me. Were people still replying? Because I found there were moments I might do a talk or an appearance. People would sign up and then say, oh, this wasn't really for me. And those people tended to, not reply to my welcome email. The people who reply are usually people who are like, oh, I'm struggling with this. Please give me the answers. I'm looking for something. Yes, okay, those are the people I want to be talking to. I could have used something like Bitly's to track all the different links in the Google Doc, but there's so many. It would have been a full-time job to handle creating the Bitly's or tracking all the clicks and stuff. It just wasn't worth it for me. But email growth, replies to the newsletter, and the other big thing for me was new leads for my business. The Google Doc is the number one way that I bring in new people for my Inbox Collective work, for the consulting work. And so that was something for me. When people were coming through and I was having intro conversations, trying to decide, could I work with you? What kind of work could we do? How could I help you? Knowing that they were a Google Doc reader, that was something to go, oh, okay. Yes, this person was a reader. They know me. That was another key metric. But for me, it was about choosing some untraditional metrics around overall audience growth through the newsletter, replies, revenue. These were all things that were as a result of engagement in the Google Doc, even if I couldn't actually see that this many people opened the Google Doc this month or this many people clicked. But I found other ways to try to measure. As far as the sign-up form, you're right, there isn't like a Google Doc subscription form. When I first started doing it, I was on TinyLetter. I pointed people towards a TinyLetter form. And at some point when I switched over, I was on Campaign Monitor for a little bit. Now I'm on MailChimp, but I ended up creating initially a page on Card, which is a great standalone web builder that has some integrations through Zapier, where I could say, go to this page. I bought the domain, notanewsletter.com. I did that actually like the first or second week after I launched it when I realized, oh my goodness, like people are signing up for this. This is a real thing. I should probably buy notanewsletter.com before it gets stolen and somebody else owns that. It would be weird enough to have a strange name and strange Google Doc, but then if somebody else owned Not a Newsletter, that would have been really bad. So I bought that. And so I went to it's still live, signup.notanewsletter.com, and I created a landing page where people can go and sign up, and I could see the traffic from there. Now that the Inbox Collective website is real, if you go to signup.notanewsletter.com, it redirects you to the Inbox Collective page where I say, hey, I'm Dan, this is the Google Doc, here's what's in it, sign up. So I just created an external page. But Card is amazing because I think it was think I was paying, I think it was $39 a year. I might be wrong about that. It might have been 49. It was not terribly expensive for a year to pay for to have this landing page. So, my costs at the start with the Google Doc were I paid for notanewsletter.com, whatever my GoDaddy cost was, $20 a year. I paid for card and I paid for the cost of my email service provider. Otherwise, the business, at least the Not a Newsletter business, has no real costs. It was an incredibly inexpensive business that happened to be a really good driver of consulting work for me. Again, you start simple, you start with what you have. As you go, you add more stuff. It's a great question.
Wow, that's interesting. That's amazing to hear. And of course, it also turned out to be like a double-edged sword for you, where you obviously helped folks and people, took like some great insights from there. But then it also helped you with your own business. Yeah, I think that's really amazing.
Yeah,
Um,
and I'll just say one more thing on that. You have to know when it's time to upgrade to better technology. So Tiny Letter was a great starting place for me because it was free and simple, and let me get started. It was enough. And then as it grew, I said, well, I want to be able to have automations. The reason I used Campaign Monitor at that moment is I'd used it at previous jobs and was super comfortable with it. All right, this is easy. I know it. I'll go here. As I've moved over the years and evolved the product, I've changed the things that I use based on the needs that I have. What, in the email space, do I need certain automations? Do I need access to, create AMP for email kind of emails? How often do I send? Segmentation needs. The business is going to continue to evolve and I'll continue to choose the right tools for what I need at that moment. But also just knowing, when I have to upgrade. It's great to start small and start simple, but then, oh, the business has hit a certain level or this newsletter's hit a certain level of growth. Great. Now it's time for me to bring on a more advanced tool or spend a little bit more to try to collect email addresses, to grow the audience, to engage with people. It's great to start small, but you do have to keep evolving. I just talked with a newsroom, a startup newsroom out in Washington State last week, and they're a little south of Seattle. Lovely people. They're starting really small. They're using their email service provider has their own landing page tool. They said, this is what we're starting with. We have our website. We're using that landing page tool to have a landing page. We're using emails through them. Super simple. This is great. But as you all grow, there's weaknesses here. Your email service provider's tool doesn't have, these pages aren't searchable. So if you search on Google for their website, nothing comes up. Okay, well, that makes it a little bit tricky. If a friend says, hey, you should check out this news organization, it's really cool, and you type it into Google, nothing happens. That's not ideal. So, okay, this was good enough to start. You've proven out the concept, but you're probably going to want to build out a real website. You're going to probably want to launch more advanced growth tactics. You're going to probably want to think about what the next evolution is as you grow, so that way, the tools and the tech and the investment matches where you are in your audience development process.
right. Yeah, I mean, so it's obviously great to start small, but as you grow, you obviously would want to have landing pages and stuff for to get your audience at that place, or to obviously have some lead magnets, to have points where on the website where people can actually sign up. So how can you share like how we can probably optimize the website or landing page for driving subscribers to your newsletter?
So this is one, and I'm going to share a tip that I learned from my friend Val Geisler, who is awesome on Twitter, and I think everyone should check out. Val is fantastic. And something that Val told me a couple years ago that I love and have borrowed and used over the years is whenever I'm trying to figure out how to optimize a landing page, I actually go back to some of my surveys to figure out, well, what do the readers need and how do I make sure that the language that I'm using on the website matches up with the problems or the solutions maybe that my audience has, the problems that they have, or the solutions that I have offered to them. So over the years, as I've evolved the language on my landing page, pretty much every single thing that exists on the landing page that isn't a personal statement, hi, I'm Dan and I run this thing, pretty much everything else that exists on that page comes directly from feedback that I've gotten from readers through personal email replies or surveys. I actually, even in not a newsletter, after you've been on the list for about 2 months, I send you a survey and I say, hey, can you answer a couple questions? Want to make sure I'm building something that serves you. And there's a question in there around jobs to be done, which is this great format. I highly recommend doing some Googling later if you're not familiar with jobs to be done. It's a cool way to figure out, am I building something that serves a specific need, serves a specific purpose, and making sure that everything you do fills some sort of audience need. And so I ask readers, what do you rely on this Google Doc for? And I come up with a bunch of different choices, plus there's some open-ended feedback. And over the years, as I've evolved the messages for Not a Newsletter, that survey has been the number one way I've done it. This was really a tip that Val kind of pointed me in the right direction on. When readers tell me, I use the Google Doc for this specific purpose, I make sure that I update my landing page and say, hey, when you sign up for Not a Newsletter, it's going to solve this for you. This is the thing it does. And that's been really, really useful. Using audience feedback, surveys, one-to-one replies to make sure, readers are telling me they rely on me for this. I bet other readers have a similar problem. Let's make sure I explain that clearly. Because when I first started using, these landing pages, my pitch for the Google Doc wasn't very good. Hi, I'm Dan. I write this really long Google Doc every month about email. Okay, that's something, but it's not the best possible pitch. But as it's evolved over the years, focusing on, making sure you know the tools and tricks you need to get the most out of your email strategy, helping you identify other great opportunities for investment in your email program, case studies and learnings from experts in the space. Okay, now I'm starting to use better messaging, but it all ties back to, this is what the surveys are telling me. The existing audience says they like this Google Doc because of X, Y, and Z reasons. Let's make sure the landing pages also uses X, Y, and Z reasons. I do the same thing with a lot of the newsroom clients that I work with. If they have a landing page, they'll say something, usually start with something simple like, sign up for our daily newsletter. And some people will just because they like newsletters or they like the news organization enough. But over time, we'll start to use surveys to say, all right, well, what do you rely on this newsletter for? What do you like about it? And then if readers, a great example of this, I worked with a newsroom in Canada. They launched a weekend guide. Every weekend, they say, here's 5 things to do in town. And we put it out there and we got some signups, and then we surveyed the audience and went, well, why do you read this thing? What do you rely on it for? What do you like? We came up with a bunch of different options around why people liked this newsletter. Was it because you were looking for restaurants to check out? You wanted family-friendly activities? You're really interested in arts and music? Was it that you just wanted to get the most out of living in this town? We came up with a bunch of different potential answers and then utilize the feedback to update all of the marketing copy on the websites. Every pop-up, every landing page built around readers told us they wanted these things. So let's make sure future readers know if they want, they can get this too. That's been really, really successful.
Awesome. I think we just almost about time to close this, but before that, I just had one more question left, and we also have one in the audience. So I'll just take mine up and then close that quickly. How can we? Do you also have any paid strategies for building audience, building an email audience? Could you share some strategies there?
So with paid, I would say start small and be very, very careful. You really want to make sure you're tracking not just the cost of a new email address, the CPL, cost per lead, but also how engaged those subscribers are. So after somebody subscribes, putting them maybe into a special segment, tracking the engagement levels there. Pretty much every email service provider has some way to track engagement. Are they very engaged? Are they less engaged? Look at it and see so you can understand, was this a good subscriber? Do the people who come via these sources, are they pretty engaged? You certainly could go to social media channels like Facebook, Twitter to advertise. I've also found that advertising in other newsletters can be a really, really effective tactic. So, depending on your audience, there might be other newsletter audiences out there that are similar or where a similar type of person is hanging out, spending time. You may want to advertise in those places. They already like email, they already like the topic, they overlap with your audience. Hey, start here. But start really small, be really cautious. Um, for a lot of people who work in this space, again, the goal isn't just to grow as big as possible, as quickly as possible, but to get the right type of subscribers. You know, to go back to my personal story, when I launched Inbox Collective as a standalone business, when I left the New Yorker, because this thing had grown, I had about 1,700 subscribers on my email list. But I knew from the responses, the engagement, the conversations that I was having with my readers that there was a real need for me to start a business to serve the community. 1,700 subscribers was enough because it was the right 1,700 people. So sometimes we get caught up with thinking, oh, the audience has to be huge. Yeah, there's no way that I could monetize this until I get to 100,000 subscribers, 1,000,000 subscribers. It's just not true. It's about identifying who your audience is, getting the right people in, and understanding, how can you serve them in a unique way. And part of paid is, okay, well, I may not need 1,000,000 people. Maybe I want to spend a little bit of money to start, just to prove out the concept, get some people onto the list so I can test it out and see, do they like it? Maybe I want to spend a little bit of money to grow because I think I can acquire low-cost email subscribers. That'll be a growth tactic. But you want to be really cautious because it's super easy to waste your money and to go onto a social media channel and say, here's, make up a number. For you, amount of money to spend could be, $10 US, $100 US, $10,000 US. I'm making up these numbers, but any amount of money, it's yours that you're spending. You just want to be really, really cautious. Start small, test out a few concepts, track engagement, see if it works for you.
Agreed. And I think it's really important to sort of try paid, majorly to get the right audience for you rather than getting more numbers. So I think that's what you very correctly stated there. Cool. So we'll take up the last question we have here. I'll just put it up here. So it says, what are the parameters you look at other than the obvious pressing needs when you're upgrading to an email marketing tool?
Awesome question. So for me, I typically evaluate, and it's different for every single person. There isn't, I want to be really careful about saying this. There is not one tool that I say everyone should use this. There's nothing where this isn't like me recommending a brand of toothpaste where I'm like, I only use Colgate, Super Plus toothpaste, whatever it is. Like, this is not that. Every email service provider has different sorts of strengths. And so you might be looking at things like how easy their email builder is to use. Integrations is a really important thing. For me, I just launched the Inbox Collective website on WordPress. And so I was thinking about tools that have strong WordPress integrations and how that could be useful for me. You might be looking how it integrates with other third-party tools, like a pop-up builder, like an opt-in monster or popped-in, and whether or not they have those sorts of integrations, or with a data integration, Google Analytics or DataBox or something like that. You might also be looking, of course, at price. As I grow the audience, how expensive is it going to be? And any special features, like Mailmodo was a really good example of this. They have a really cool AMP for email builder. That's something that other email service providers, many don't offer. And maybe something like that is something that you want to take advantage of. You say, oh, I want to use AMP for email. I want to do surveys or other things within newsletters. That's super important. So that's why I would choose this versus something else. But there is no one size fits all kind of tool. Yeah, I start to always evaluate, when I work with any client, the first question is, what's at the absolute top of your priority list? What do you absolutely need? And we'll come up with that list. All right, I need a certain drag and drop builder, or I need this integration, or this level of pricing. And then we start to rank kind of, okay, of the things, integrations, the builder, cost, what's the most important, what's less important, and then try to match that with the right tool that might fit most of your needs. For especially individual writers, there's lots of tools that would be good options. The bigger the company gets, some of the big newsrooms that I work with, their options start to shrink. A huge newsroom, the New Yorker, we wouldn't be on Substack or Review or Tiny Letter or something like that. We need a more advanced solution because of the CRM integration and the cost and the pricing and the volume of emails we're sending, deliverability. But when you're small, if you're an individual writer starting a newsletter, you have dozens of actually really good options. You start to pick, okay, based on a couple factors: price, integrations, features, builder, data, which thing seems to fit where I need what I need right now. And you can always, as the business grows, evolve and make decisions or change things over time too.
Interesting. Great. Thanks for that, Dan. So I think we'll close this chat now, and I think I don't have any questions anymore here. But yeah, I mean, I think I got to learn a lot from this. I'm sure the audience also did. Would you have any parting notes to share, or anything, any takeaways, anything that you would like to share with the audience?
The last big takeaway, besides, of course, please sign up for Not a Newsletter if you're interested. You can go to the inboxcollective.com and you'll find a link in the corner to sign up for the newsletter. But the other big thing is, if you're starting something new, and that could be a brand new newsletter, could just be a new project, could be a new series of lead magnets or stories, anything. Start small, try to prove out the concept as quickly as you can, and then decide, is it working? Is it not? And what do I want to do from here? So with anything that you do, give yourself a little bit of time to evaluate the success of the project, but the goal is to start as quickly as possible. The goal is to get something out in the world, because the sooner something is out in the world and people can read it and engage with it and give you feedback on it, the faster you can decide, do I like this? Is it working? Do I want to do more or less of these sorts of things? So often I talk both with big organizations and individuals who get worried about making sure the website has to look exactly a certain way. The newsletter has to be designed in just a certain way. We can't start until we do this or this or this. And it's really easy to be paralyzed by all of the to-do list of things you have to do. I can't start until I've achieved these 7 things. And then what often happens is people never start, because there's always more stuff to try before they're ready, before they've crossed dotted all the I's and crossed all the T's. Start soon. Start maybe even before you feel like you're totally ready. Get something out in the world. The sooner you do that, the sooner you start to learn about what's working and what isn't, and can make the right decisions for the future. But you don't really know until something's out in the world. Even all these years later, I still feel really confident when I launch projects or launch new things. And I make stuff all the time that just doesn't work. And it surprises me. Oh, wow, I really thought this was going to do better. But it's okay. The most important thing is it's out there. Now I know. Now I can figure out what I want to do next.
Awesome. I mean, of course, start soon, because inspiration is perishable.
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah. Thank you, Dan. Thanks for this amazing chat. We had a lot of fun chatting with you. Thanks for joining us. And yeah, see you soon again then. Thanks a
Thanks for
lot.
having me. This was really fun.
Yeah.